Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. If you'd asked me 6 months ago where I'd be now, I'd have told you. In the corner office on the 21st floor, freshly promoted to VP of Strategic Growth, sipping overpriced cold brew while outlining the next big market initiative. That was the plan. That was the path I had built for myself, one painstaking step at a time. My name is Miranda Fletcher, and for the past 5 years, I've been the backbone of Norwell and Keene. I joined when we were drowning, bloated budgets, outdated systems, and 1 foot in the grave with our biggest client. I didn't run. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I streamlined our operations, rebuilt our client engagement model, and introduced performance tracking systems that no one else bothered to understand until they started seeing the numbers. Under my direction, our campaign success rate jumped 40%, client retention doubled, and we started pulling in quarterly growth numbers the board hadn't seen in years. They didn't just lean on me. They depended on me. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't political. I just delivered, over and over. So when the VP role opened up, no one questioned who the natural successor would be. I'd been unofficially doing half the job already. Even my boss, David, would crack jokes in meetings like, "We should just let Miranda run the place." People laughed. I smiled. And deep down, I believed it, because I'd earned it. Then came Tuesday, our weekly all-hands. Same muffins, same coffee, that tasted like burnt ambition. I took my usual seat near the middle, laptop open, heart steady. David stood at the front with that PR grin, tapping the mic like he was about to unveil a new app. "Exciting news today," he said. "We're entering a bold new chapter, and I'm thrilled to introduce someone who will help lead us there. Please welcome our new VP of Strategic Growth, Ethan Riley." Clapping, polite, confused. My hands didn't move. Ethan walked out from the side like he was walking a red carpet. Tall, smug, too relaxed for someone who didn't know where the bathroom was yet. I recognized him immediately, David's college buddy. I'd seen him once, nursing a whiskey at David's housewarming, talking over people like they were screensavers. He had no background in strategy, no experience with our product lines, not even a passing understanding of our market. But he did have one thing: David's favor. I sat there in disbelief. My jaw clenched, my pulse tapped like a warning. No announcement, no heads up, not even the courtesy of a conversation. After the meeting, I pulled David aside. "You didn't think I'd want that role?" I asked. My voice was calm, but I could feel the heat rising in my chest. He gave me that grin again, the one that always felt like a performance. "Miranda, you're amazing at what you do. Nobody's denying that. But Ethan's got big picture energy. He's a visionary, and we need someone who can shake things up." Shake things up. That's what they always say when they want to bring in a man who talks fast and delivers slow. "Ethan's here to complement the great work you're already doing," David continued. "I'm counting on you to help him settle in." Settle in? I walked back to my desk in a daze. My inbox was already flooding with congratulatory notes. None of them for me. Ethan had been here 12 minutes and was already the future. I was the scaffolding. But here's what they didn't know. Everything Ethan would rely on, every system he'd touch, every success he'd inevitably take credit for, that was mine. My work, my strategy, my architecture. And if I walked tomorrow, 60% of our active revenue streams would go with me. Not out of spite, out of design. Because when you build something alone, you know exactly how to dismantle it. They didn't see me as a leader. Not yet. I wish I could say I went home that night, cried into a pint of cookie dough ice cream, and moved on. But I didn't. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even sleep. I just sat at my kitchen counter, the city lights filtering through my blinds, and stared at the untouched dinner I'd made out of habit, not hunger. I wasn't just disappointed. I was insulted. I'd spent 5 years proving myself, not just with results, but with leadership. I mentored interns, smoothed out interdepartmental chaos, and brought us through 2 restructuring phases without losing a single team member. I had carved a clear path, and they painted over it overnight. But I wasn't going to implode. I decided to watch instead. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept my head down and my eyes open. I showed up early, left late, attended every meeting I wasn't explicitly uninvited from. I needed to understand Ethan, not just who he was, but what he brought to the table. Maybe, he really did have some secret weapon, some brilliant edge that I hadn't seen yet. Spoiler, he didn't. Ethan Riley was all volume and velocity. He spoke in buzzwords. Disruption, synergy, agile innovation. His meetings felt like TED Talk auditions with no script. I watched him lead a project briefing where he spent 30 minutes talking about vertical alignment and not once referenced our actual product. He delegated everything, made vague promises, and relied heavily on the team I'd built to carry the weight. But the worst part? He didn't even know he was flailing. He walked through the office like he owned the floor, backslapping people he didn't know and repeating my ideas in meetings like he'd just thought of them. He once introduced a Q3 rollout strategy that I had detailed in a memo 2 months prior, one he'd clearly skimmed and repackaged. I watched David nod approvingly. And that's when it clicked. Ethan wasn't hired because he was smart. He was hired because he was familiar. He and David went way back, fraternity brothers, fantasy football partners, golf trip buddies. It wasn't a secret. Ethan dropped stories like breadcrumbs in every conversation. Remember Cabo, Dave? Still owe you a rematch on that back nine. At first, I thought it was harmless nostalgia. But then I realized it wasn't nostalgia. It was currency. That's all this was. A favor. David brought in someone he trusted, not because of merit, but because he wanted someone who wouldn't challenge him, someone who would echo his ideas, stroke his ego, and keep things easy. And Ethan? He was more than happy to cash that check. The day it really sank in was during a stakeholder meeting for a new client acquisition. I had spent a week compiling a comprehensive market analysis, outlining risk factors, competitor trends, and a 3-phase launch model tailored to the client's niche. I sent it to Ethan ahead of time. He never replied. In the meeting, he barely glanced at the deck. Instead, he winged it, told a story about instinct over analytics, dropped a sports metaphor, and then looked at me like I was supposed to applaud. Afterwards, he pulled me aside and said, "You're really good at the detail stuff. That's what makes us a great team. I fly high. You keep the engine running." I smiled. But in my head, I was already drafting the blueprint for my next move. Because I wasn't just watching anymore, I was calculating. It started with a calendar ping, one of those vague leadership update, organizational announcement at 4 p.m. invitations that always meant someone was either being promoted or escorted out quietly. I sat through most of the day in a daze, torn between suspicion and cautious optimism. Ethan had been floundering since day one, and part of me hoped, that maybe the company had finally come to its senses. Maybe someone had finally seen through the charm and buzzwords. Maybe my moment was finally here. At 4 p.m. sharp, we all gathered in the glass-walled conference space. David stood at the front, his usual half-smile already in place. Ethan was next to him, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in weeks, which was my first red flag. "Thanks for joining, everyone," David began, clapping his hands like we were about to play charades. "I'll keep this short and sweet. Ethan will be stepping down as VP of Strategic Growth. He's accepted an international consulting opportunity, and we wish him the best in his next adventure." Murmurs. Some surprise, a few token claps. I didn't clap. I barely breathed. Then came the second blow. "We're excited to announce that Jason Meyer will be stepping into the VP role, effective immediately." My head snapped up. "Jason?" Jason from Product Alignment. Jason, who'd been at the company 2 years, tops. He was friendly, charming in a quiet way, but no more qualified than the houseplants we kept forgetting to water. He hadn't led any major initiatives. He hadn't managed cross-functional departments. His biggest accomplishment, as far as I knew, was a half-baked integration pitch that I had quietly rewritten before it tanked a client meeting. Polite applause filled the room. I felt like I was underwater. Jason stepped forward, shook Ethan's hand, and gave a little wave to the room like he'd just won a raffle. David clapped him on the back and said something about fresh thinking and alignment with future-forward goals. I stood there, stunned, not overlooked, dismissed. Again. No explanation, no meeting, not even a vague heads up. I walked back to my office in a blur, closed the door, and just stood there. It wasn't about Jason. It was about what they refused to see in me, what they didn't want to admit. I had outworked, outperformed, and outlasted nearly everyone in leadership, and still, I was invisible when it mattered. And that moment, that humiliation, it wasn't going to fade. It was going to ignite. I waited until the dust settled from the announcement, until Jason had made his little acceptance speech and everyone had returned to pretending this was normal. Just another week in corporate wonderland. But I couldn't let it go. Not this time. I gave it 2 days. Just enough time for everyone to get comfortable again. Then I put the meeting on David's calendar. Performance and role alignment discussion, 10 a.m. Thursday. Corporate enough to get past his assistant, pointed enough to get his attention. I walked into his office on time, as always. Binder under my arm, hair pulled back, calm, composed, surgical. I'd gone over every word I was about to say the night before, pacing my apartment until midnight. I didn't want anger to drive this. I wanted facts, receipts, precision. David sat behind his oversized desk, sleeves rolled up like he'd been solving world hunger with spreadsheets. He looked up, smiling like he always did when he thought he held the upper hand. "Miranda," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite him, "was wondering when you'd want to chat." I didn't sit. Not yet. "I want to talk about my role, and my pay," I said, setting the binder on his desk, "because we both know I've been carrying more than what's reflected in either." He raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "All right, I'm listening." I flipped open the binder. Inside were color-coded charts, timelines, project breakdowns, all marked with my contributions. Campaigns I'd led, accounts I'd saved, deliverables I'd executed without a hitch, client emails, performance reviews, side-by-side metrics showing how much revenue had come directly from projects I had either designed or salvaged. I've managed strategic partnerships, implemented rollout structures, rescued 3 client accounts last quarter alone, and personally onboarded every team member in the growth department, I said. When Ethan was VP, I handled 80% of his workload, quietly, efficiently. David flipped through the pages slowly, the way you do when you're pretending to read something you've already decided to ignore. "I'm not asking for the title anymore," I said. "You've made your decision. But if I'm going to continue doing this level of work, I want to be compensated accordingly." He looked up then, smiled tight, but still hanging on like a bad habit. "Miranda, I get where you're coming from, but we can't just go around adjusting salaries every time someone feels they're working a little overtime." "A little overtime?" I repeated. "David, I am the reason your Q2 targets were hit. I've brought in over 60% of the company's active revenue streams in the last 8 months. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm demanding parity." He gave a short laugh then. A real one this time. Full, dismissive, almost amused. "Come on," he said. "You're great. You know that. But I'm not going to pay a woman more than a man." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" He chuckled again, like I was just being dramatic. "Don't take it the wrong way. It's just not how things work around here. Jason's in the VP seat now. Can't have his direct reports making more than him, especially not—" He hesitated, then gestured vaguely in my direction. "Optically." "Especially not a woman, you mean?" I said, my voice flat. "Look," he said, suddenly defensive. "You've got a good setup. We value you. You're an asset. But raising your salary above Jason's? It sends the wrong message. People talk." "What people?" I asked. He paused, then shrugged. "Miranda, this isn't personal." But it was. Every word of it was. I stared at him for a moment. At his expensive watch, his comfortable chair, the window behind him overlooking a skyline built on the backs of people like me. Quiet workers, careful thinkers, relentless performers. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was something deeper. A knowing. He would never give me what I deserved. Not because I hadn't earned it, but because acknowledging me meant admitting how much he owed me. And that was a debt he had no intention of paying. I closed the binder. "Thanks for the clarity," I said. He nodded, smug. Like that was the end of the story. It wasn't. It was the beginning. Because what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already started documenting everything. I wasn't just keeping track. I was building something, quietly, strategically. And when I was done, they wouldn't be able to laugh. The shift didn't come with fire or fury. It came with silence. The morning after my meeting with David, the one where he laughed and said he'd never pay a woman more than a man, I woke up in the stillness of my apartment and realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even sad. I was done. Done being the fixer, the back pocket safety net, the human duct tape they used to patch every hole and smooth over every crack. The truth wasn't subtle anymore. It was screaming in fluorescent lights. I was being used. They relied on my silence, my work ethic, my reputation for reliability. They assumed I'd keep giving, keep solving, keep covering, because I always had. Because I never made a scene. Because I believed that someday they'd recognize it. But they didn't want to recognize it. They wanted to keep taking advantage of it. So that morning, I walked into the office at 9 a.m. on the dot. Not a minute early. I didn't grab my usual espresso on the way. I didn't prep reports. I didn't scan Jason's calendar to see what disasters might be brewing. I sat down, opened my laptop, and did my job. Only my job. That alone was enough to start the tremors. By 10:15, I had my first email from Jason. "Hey, quick favor. Can you help tighten up the talking points for the Maxell brief? Just need that Miranda magic." I didn't respond. At 11:03, he pinged me on Slack. "Sorry to bug. Just a couple of slides I'd love your eye on," I typed. "Out of scope. Check with your coordinator." And sent it. At lunch, I walked out of the building. I didn't eat at my desk. I didn't leave Slack open on my phone. I sat on a bench 2 blocks away and ate in peace, feeling the unfamiliar quiet of time that belonged to me. When I got back, a mild panic had started to simmer. The content team had submitted a funnel breakdown that didn't align with our new metrics. Normally, I'd catch it before it hit the client. Fix it. Rewrite it. Smooth it over. This time, I didn't even open the doc. By 2:30 p.m., Jason was red-faced in the hallway outside my office, fumbling through papers. "I thought you were helping on the pitch deck," he said, trying for polite confusion. "I wasn't assigned to the pitch deck," I replied calmly, "and I haven't been a VP's assistant since... ever." He opened his mouth, then closed it, and walked away. By 4:00, I'd heard the words, "What happened to Miranda?" float through the office more than once, in whispered side chats, in confused glances, in tight-lipped check-ins. I didn't answer, because nothing had happened to me. I had simply stopped doing the extra, stopped being everyone's secret plan B, stopped giving away the parts of myself they refused to value. David stopped me in the hallway as I was packing up right at 5:00. "Leaving early?" he asked with that forced half-smile, the one he used when he was trying to sound casual, but couldn't quite hide the edge. "It's 5:01, I replied, swinging my bag over my shoulder. "I'll be in tomorrow at 9. He blinked. That tiny flicker of confusion told me he was already recalibrating, already wondering if something had shifted. And it had. Everything had. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I was awake. And now that I had stopped cushioning their incompetence, their shortcuts, their laziness, they were going to feel every inch of what I'd been holding up. For the first time in years, I didn't carry my laptop home. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about it. I felt free. There's a misconception that women in workplaces like mine are bitter because we don't get what we want. That every promotion we watch go to someone else is a blow to our egos, not our effort. That we're jealous, threatened, emotional. Let me set that straight. If the men around me were truly better than me, if they were smarter, sharper, faster, if they had the kind of vision you don't learn, the kind that rewrites entire markets with a sentence, I wouldn't just be okay with them getting the spotlight. I'd stand beside them and cheer. Because I love excellence. I live for it. I respect it deeply. But that's not what I was surrounded by. Jason was fine. Not exceptional, not awful, just fine. Polished enough to present well, confident enough to bluff through meetings, friendly enough to avoid suspicion. He had no strategic edge, no instinct for timing, and definitely no depth in the areas that actually mattered. I once watched him suggest a one-size-fits-all solution to a multi-market rollout, completely oblivious to the legal implications in 3 different countries. If I hadn't stepped in, we'd have been slapped with compliance violations that could have cost us our biggest contract. And Ethan? Ethan was a walking buzzword generator. He once stood in front of a client and said, "Let's not get stuck in the data, let's lean into the vibe." The vibe. In a pitch involving a 7-figure SaaS proposal. I was insulted, yes, but not because they were ahead of me. Because they were behind me, far behind. And everyone knew it. The day it truly cemented for me was in the middle of a Thursday afternoon. I was in the copy room, fixing a jammed printer like I was some kind of tech therapist, when I overheard David's voice drift in from the corridor. He was speaking to Max from finance, loud enough that I wasn't eavesdropping, so much as simply existing in earshot. "Honestly, Jason's a nice guy," David said, "but he couldn't structure a go-to-market plan if you handed him the blueprint and a coloring book." Max laughed. "He botched the launch timeline, didn't he?" "Completely," David said, chuckling. "We're lucky Miranda spotted it before the client did." "Again." I froze. And then he added, "And don't get me started on Ethan. That guy talks like he's pitching a TED Talk in every meeting. Charisma for days, but zero follow-through. If we left him in charge of procurement, we'd be sourcing servers from Etsy." They laughed, loudly. I stood there, one hand still on the printer tray, paper half-fed and forgotten. Something inside me, something small and bitter, snapped into focus. David knew. He knew Jason didn't know what he was doing. He knew Ethan was fluff and filler. He wasn't promoting them because they were good. He was promoting them because they were convenient, familiar, harmless. And me? I was none of those things. I was competent, unapologetically so. I asked questions they didn't want to answer. I offered solutions before they even realized there was a problem. I didn't wait for permission. I moved, built, led. That made me a threat. Not because I was wrong, but because I was right too often for their comfort. And yet they kept me exactly where they wanted me, quietly cleaning up their messes, performing behind the scenes, applauding from the wings while someone else took the bow. That's what hurt. Not that they overlooked me, but that they did it while admitting privately that I was better. There's nothing more demeaning than watching people who need you pretend they don't, and nothing more infuriating than hearing them mock the very men they chose over you. Men who couldn't carry your workload, men who couldn't pitch without crib notes, men who needed your input to survive but never once offered you credit. That day, I didn't go back to my desk right away. I stood in the copy room for another full 5 minutes, heart pounding, hands shaking, not from nerves, but from clarity. If they had given Jason the role because he outperformed me, I could have accepted it. If Ethan had landed deals I couldn't close, I would have respected that. But they didn't. They couldn't. Instead, they let those men coast, while they made me climb. And that's when I knew this wasn't about merit. It never had been. It was about convenience, optics, control. So the next time Jason fumbled a project and looked to me for a lifeline, I let him drown in silence. The next time Ethan CC'd me on a last-minute proposal asking for feedback, I clicked archive without reading it. I wasn't going to help anymore, because you don't get to belittle me in private exploit me in public, and then expect me to carry you when you stumble. Not anymore. It started with a calendar invite that appeared at the end of the day, Friday. No subject line fluff, no context. Just mandatory meeting, Monday, 9 a.m., conference room 3C. I stared at it for a few seconds too long. There's a specific kind of silence that follows betrayal. I'd known it before, and the stillness that settled over me when I saw that invite. It felt familiar, chillingly so. I didn't respond, didn't ask what it was about. I knew. Monday morning, I dressed with care. Dark blazer, clean lines, nothing soft. I tied my hair back like I was preparing for court. When I walked into conference room 3C, I wasn't surprised to find David already seated. Next to him sat Lila from HR, posture stiff and smile strained, like she'd just been told to euthanize someone's dog, but make it sound inspirational. "Miranda," David said, standing just long enough to perform decency. "Thanks for joining us." I didn't sit. I looked between them. David's coffee was still steaming. Lila had a folder on the table, closed, centered, corporate beige. "We wanted to talk to you about some recent concerns," David began, fingers steepled like he was hosting a TED Talk about difficult conversations. "Concerns?" I repeated. He nodded. "Yes, there's been feedback that you've become less engaged, less collaborative, that your role performance no longer aligns with company values." I blinked. "That's an impressive spin," I said. "You mean I stopped working for free?" Lila shifted uncomfortably. David leaned forward, like I'd just misunderstood the plot of a story he wrote. "It's more than that," he said. "There have been missed opportunities for leadership, refusals to participate in team initiatives. You used to be proactive. Now you've made it clear you only want to do the minimum required." I let that hang in the air, because that was the heart of it. The minimum required had always been the job. Everything else? The endless late nights, the crisis cleanups, the unpaid mentoring, the invisible labor? That had been me choosing to do more. And when I stopped, when I gave them only what they paid me for, they called it failure. They called it attitude, disengagement, non-compliance. David continued, "We can't have someone in a leadership-adjacent role who doesn't show initiative. That kind of energy affects the culture." The culture. There it was again. The euphemism they used when what they really meant was, "You stopped making us look good for free." Lila finally opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My termination letter. It was already signed, dated, printed days ago. This wasn't a conversation. It was a formality. I looked up at David. "This company survived the last 2 years because of me," I said quietly. "Your biggest client stayed because I built systems that worked. I trained people, ran point on contracts, cleaned up your messes, and taught 2 out of the last 3 VPs how to do their jobs." He didn't meet my eyes. "I didn't stop performing," I added. "I stopped bleeding for you." "Miranda," Lila began, voice syrupy with practiced neutrality, "we really appreciate everything you've contributed, and this isn't a reflection of your worth." "No," I cut in, "it's a reflection of your comfort." They didn't want high performance. They wanted quiet compliance. They wanted overworked, overgiving women who never asked for what they were worth. And when I stopped being convenient, they manufactured a narrative that made them feel justified in removing me. I looked at David one last time. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smug. He was just small. The kind of man who mistakes power for wisdom, who surrounds himself with yes men and calls it leadership. "You've just fired the person who made this company look competent," I said. And then I turned and walked out. No tears, no begging, just the echo of my heels across the hallway, sharp and steady. They thought they were writing my ending, but all they'd done was light the match. And they were standing in a house I built. I didn't pack a box. There was no dramatic sweep of personal belongings, no slow-motion montage of me removing framed certificates or farewell emails filled with platitudes from people who never knew what I did. I walked out with my bag, my coat, and a flash drive the size of a thumb that held more power than anyone in that building understood. See, what they never realized, what David never bothered to ask, was just how much of their success was built on the programs I had designed, refined, and quietly maintained. I wasn't just managing projects, I was managing infrastructure. Over the years, in between meetings and crisis calls, I built a suite of internal systems, task mapping dashboards, real-time project visualization tools, client tracking systems that outperformed anything IT ever implemented. Nothing fancy, nothing branded, just clean, intuitive frameworks that made collaboration seamless. And I shared them, not because I had to, because I believed we were working towards something together. I didn't password protect them. I didn't hold back access. I embedded them across departments because I thought we were on the same team. Because I was foolish enough to think that generosity was how you earned respect. People used my systems without even knowing they were mine. They integrated them into their daily workflows, depended on them. Whole teams built their operations around what I'd quietly created. And now, I was taking it back, not out of spite, not for revenge, but because it was mine. When I got home that evening, I plugged the flash drive into my personal laptop, clean backups, every script, every dashboard, every automation string, everything I had ever coded or customized that wasn't explicitly owned by the company, which was most of it, because I'd built it all on my own time, on my own devices, when IT was too slow or too lazy to deliver. Then I signed in to the admin console. Yes, I still had access. They'd fired me, but they hadn't revoked my credentials yet. Typical. I revoked the shared keys, removed the external link permissions, disabled the API bridges I'd set up for the marketing department's analytics feed. By 8 p.m., the dashboard stopped updating. By 8:17, Jason sent out an all-staff Slack message. Anyone else having issues with the resource map? Nothing syncing. By 8:32, the sales pipeline tracker began throwing errors. Forecasting projections? Blank. The onboarding tracker? Frozen. I didn't reply. Let them troubleshoot. Let them file tickets with IT and wait 3 days for someone to say, weird. They would figure it out eventually. That what they relied on wasn't the tools. It was the woman who built them. And she was gone. They took my ideas. They ignored my voice. They fired my body, but they forgot. The code knew me. The logic obeyed me. The systems I built didn't just automate work, they translated chaos into clarity. Without me, chaos returns. And chaos doesn't wait for approvals, it just arrives. It didn't take long. By Tuesday, the entire office was humming with panic beneath a thin layer of forced normalcy. On the surface, they were trying to keep up the routine, weekly syncs, client calls, progress decks, but underneath, it was unraveling. The tools they had taken for granted, mine, were gone, and no one knew how to fill the void. The marketing team missed their campaign milestones because the feedback loop I had built was no longer automatically flagging performance drops. Sales stumbled through calls without the client history tags I had embedded into their CRM views. Even the analytics department was reduced to manual spreadsheet entry, like rewinding a digital world back to analog chaos. But it wasn't just the systems that were missing, it was momentum. I had been the silent current, the force that pushed everything forward without asking for recognition. And now, without me, the wheels weren't turning, they were grinding. David was quieter in meetings. Jason was visibly sweating. Every question that came his way seemed to come with a second one. Did Miranda ever show you how to? Followed by a tense silence when he admitted she hadn't. And then, it reached the partners. Not just David's inner circle of complacent yes-men, but the ones who mattered. The external stakeholders, the ones who actually moved money. On Thursday, I got a message I wasn't expecting, from my personal email. Subject line, "Let's talk, immediately." It was from Angela Zhu, one of the founding partners from our longest-standing client account. Angela wasn't warm, she wasn't chatty, but she was razor-sharp, and she had a memory like a steel trap. She was the kind of executive you didn't cross unless you wanted to be humiliated in front of your own team. And she had questions. We met over coffee the next day in a neutral cafe downtown. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Why?" she said bluntly. "Are you not the vice president yet?" I blinked. "You heard?" She nodded. Noticed the system stopped functioning. Reports went haywire. I asked why. "One of your former colleagues finally admitted they let you go." I stayed quiet. Angela leaned forward. "We never signed our renewal contract," she said. "It's sitting on my desk. I told David I wouldn't move forward until I knew why the person who actually knew what was going on was no longer employed there." I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or nauseous. "They told me you were difficult," she said, eyes sharp. "That you'd stopped collaborating. That you weren't a cultural fit." I exhaled through my nose. "That's code for, I stopped working 12-hour days without acknowledgement." Angela smiled tightly. "That's what I figured." She sat back, watching me. "Here's the thing," she said. "You made us money. You made them money. And if they're too foolish to keep you, that's their loss. But I don't like investing in companies that implode because they don't know how to retain value." I nodded slowly. "So what happens now?" Angela's expression didn't change. "Now? I put the pressure where it belongs. You'll hear from me again soon." And just like that, she left. No goodbyes. Just her sharp heels tapping against the tile floor, echoing like a warning. The fallout was coming. Not just the internal cracks, but pressure from the outside, from people who did see what I was worth. The empire David had built on illusion, it was starting to buckle. And I wasn't even done yet. It took exactly 2 weeks. 2 weeks of rising chaos. 2 weeks of missed deadlines, client tension, and unfiltered panic behind closed doors. 2 weeks of everyone realizing what they'd lost. Not just the tools, not just the workflows, but the only person who had held the seams together without asking for applause. When the call finally came, it wasn't from David. It was from the board. A voice I barely recognized asked me to meet with them directly. No intermediaries, no HR scripts. I agreed, but only after I wrote my list. We met in a neutral downtown office space, the kind used for arbitration and executive interviews. I walked in alone, binder in hand. Just like the day I asked for what I was worth. Only this time, I wasn't hoping. I was dictating. "We'd like to offer you your position back," the lead board member said. "Effective immediately." I waited a beat. "Which position?" I asked. There was a pause, and then, "Vice President of Strategic Development." Not growth, not support, not some half-title used to appease egos. Strategic development. The role I had built myself for. The role I had already been doing. "And," I said. "And with full compensation parity," she added. "Retroactive, and reporting directly to the board, not to David." I smiled, just a little. David wasn't on the call. Because David was gone. Angela Shu had pulled her partnership, took the renewal contract with her, and made it very public. 3 other clients followed. The board didn't just panic, they investigated. What they found? A pattern of negligence, suppressed reviews, unaddressed misconduct, and more than a few emails about me that they couldn't scrub. David had been transitioned out. HR called it restructuring. I called it balance. My first day back was quiet. No balloons, no dramatic scenes. Just me, walking through the glass doors with my badge reactivated and my title finally accurate. My old desk was gone. I had an office now. Corner view, sunlight streaming in like it finally recognized me too. People stared. Of course they did. Some ducked their heads. Some smiled like nothing had ever happened. But a few, my team, the ones who'd worked closest with me, came to my door that afternoon. "We're glad you're back," one of them said. "Should have never happened," said another. They didn't overdo it. They didn't grovel. But they said what mattered. "We supported you then. We support you now." And that? That meant something. Not because I needed validation, but because they saw it too now. The rot in the system, the cost of silence, the danger of letting mediocrity rise on charm while brilliance was expected to just pitch in. I rebuilt the tools, cleaned up the mess. But I did it my way this time, on my hours, on my salary, with my name stamped clearly on everything I touched. No more ghost labor, no more whispered contributions. This time, everyone knew exactly who was holding it together. Me, Miranda Fletcher. And I wasn't asking for anything anymore. I was leading,